The human foot and ankle has 28 bones, 33 joints, 112 ligaments, and 33 muscles to control all of the different movements that we are capable of doing with our ankle and our foot and our toes. And it makes sense because as humans evolved, we weren't wearing shoes and walking on smooth, paved surfaces. We were walking over tree roots and rocks. And so our feet had to mold to the terrain underneath them. One of the most common injuries in the world is ankle injuries. And that's because it's a vulnerable area with all of those different joints and getting impacted every single time we take a step. But also, do you think it could be possible that the reason that ankles tend to get so injured nowadays is because we squeeze our feet into shoes where our toes don't get to move around, and then we just walk on these nice smooth surfaces all day? If you followed me, you know I had a very bad ankle injury last year, and I received a lot of questions about my recovery. And so in this video, I want to share with you a few things you can keep in mind to prevent ankle injury or to help rehab from an old injury. Even if it happened years ago, your body may have adapted with certain compensatory movements. And that is why when you've injured your ankle once, you're more likely to injure it again. So when you're recovering from an ankle injury, the first thing that you want to be able to do is probably just be able to stand up and walk on your ankle. And so this is just a nice and simple forward and backward movement. We all kind of know that heel-toe movement that occurs when we're walking. But you probably didn't injure your ankle by walking in the most optimal way. You probably injured your ankle when, for some reason or another, it went into some kind of funky position. And I'm sure you've had experiences where it was a bit of a close call. Your ankle went into a funny position, but then everything was okay. And the reason why everything was okay was because your body took care of you. All of those different joints and muscles and ligaments did their job of holding your weight in a different range of motion besides what we tend to train at the gym when we do our calf raises or when we go to our yoga class and we're just doing our warrior ones and warrior twos. So if you've received exercises from a physio, it's probably included lots of turning around of the ankle, getting into the full range of motion of that ankle rotation. But here's a few things to keep in mind, especially as you start to go through your recovery and your ankle is feeling stronger. One, you want to be able to train these ranges of motion with your actual weight on it. A yoga practice is a great opportunity to practice these, but you can do it anywhere. For example, in your lunging postures, play around with turning your ankle in different directions as you bend into that knee. So you can start to build some strength into different ranges of motion. Pay attention to what that back ankle is doing as well. You can play around with changing the direction that the foot, the toes are pointing in, just very gently and mindfully moving with some weight into these different ranges of motion. Don't forget, you can also take the weight onto the top of the foot. Play around with pointing the toe in these different directions. You don't have to do it in a full-on big style lunge. You can just take it right behind you and play around with some movements like this to help not just the soft tissues like the muscles and ligaments and tendons, but also help that communication through the nervous system to the brain, to tell the brain like, hey, even though some trauma has occurred here in the past, it's okay now, it's safe. Now, the second thing to look out for, especially if you have already had an ankle injury, is if you can really isolate the movements that you're doing in just the ankle. What the body tends to do, especially if there's previous trauma, then the brain is like, I'm not sure I like that movement, but then you're telling that body part to do a movement. And so another body part might often take over a little bit. And this is very common. For example, this is when like a small child is learning how to write and they're just learning how to use their hands, and so they're doing all this with their tongue. Have you seen that before? And that's That's what happens. Maybe whenever you're thinking about something, doing something really intricate, you might notice that your hands are doing funky things. So what can occur in a lot of people, with or without previous ankle injuries, is that when you're doing your ankle rotation, your toes are doing a lot of the work. So try and relax your toes, keep your toes totally relaxed, and isolate that movement. Think about being able to isolate movements before you try and make them integrated. Then you can really understand, okay, is there a range of motion where this particular joint is struggling? So the examples I've given you here are just a very, 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 very small few. There's so many different movements that you can do with your ankle, your feet, your toes that will help strengthen not just the muscles, but also the neurological connection between your feet and your brain. And yes, you can look up on your favorite search engine some ankle exercises, of course, but just play around in your movement and explore. Do something that you've never done before. If you need help with that, then that's why I created my creative sequencing course, is to give you the tools to break you out of the habitual movement patterns that you always do and